Hi guys, welcome back to another video. This week's video is going to be wrapping up the month of February. In this video, I'm going to be going over the 5 books that I read in February, which for me personally is a really slow month. I'll give myself the fact that it's the shortest month of the year. Even though we did have a leap day this year, it was still the shortest month of the year. 5 books is okay, definitely under what I normally get through, but you know what? That's okay. 5 is better than 0, so let's get into it. Let's talk about what I read this month. The first book that I read in February was a book that I started in January and finished like a weekish into February, and that is The Magician's Land by Lev Grossman, which is the 3rd book in the Magician's trilogy. So throughout the Magician's series as a whole, we follow Quentin, who, while in his senior year of high school, learns that he is a magician, and he is sent off to Break Bill's Academy to learn about magic. And along the way, he meets a ton of different people who come into and out of his life, and he discovers new worlds within our world and just discovers a lot about himself, where he fits into magic, where does the magic come from, how do we reconcile that. It's very existential. It's very critiquing of power and kind of religion and of all of these very intellectual concepts. So it is a series that you really have to prepare to dive into. It is a very literary series, and this one specifically, at least it starts off as kind of like a magical heist, which initially had me really excited, thinking that was going to be like the arc that held this story. But I did not love how the story was told. I think that the heist concept is super fun because, you know, Quentin is learning, he's at the point where he's learned a lot about his skills and his magic and the people around him and what magic they can do. And so we see them all coming together to pull off this heist, and you're like, yes, here it goes. And I really bought up with the style choice of having a lot of flashbacks. I personally am not a big flashback fan because it basically tells the reader, to me, it tells the reader, hey, this thing that I'm doing right now is not that interesting. What was interesting was this other thing way back when that sorry you weren't there. And in my brain I'm like, well, author, you're the one like crafting the story, you could put me there. And I would say a third to a half of this was some sort of flashback, and it just felt kind of passive and not super engaging. And like even at the very end, like there's a big climactic moment and the character that we're following is just observing. Like she's not in the throes of what's happening. She's just kind of watching it all go down. It's just like giving her commentary. And so I feel like there's a lot of different ways that I wanted more action from this story that it just didn't give me. So overall, I would give this book like a 3 out of 5 stars. If you like literary fiction and you're curious about fantasy, absolutely check out the series. For me, there was just something missing, but again, I think that with the right reader, this is just like candy. Like, I know so many people who just absolutely adore this whole trilogy, so if you're curious about it at all, give it a go. The second book that I finished in February was Us Against You by Fredrick Backman, and February is the month for me of Beartown taking over my entire life. So the Beartown series focuses on a town called Beartown in Sweden where hockey is everything. There are professional teams, teenagers teams, kids teams, and everyone in this town just loves hockey. And this book follows the perspective of just about every single person in this town. We focus mostly on a crew of teenagers on, I believe the junior team is where they start, and their progression through the ranks in the Beartown hockey scene. So a big element of Beartown hockey is their rivalry with their neighboring town of Head, who has a rival hockey team, and they just butt heads. The animosity of hockey is just like seeped into the soil of these towns. So throughout Us Against You, tensions rise between Beartown fans and Head fans. And this book introduces some like political scheming of keeping the hockey teams afloat as Head hockey starts to take off ahead of Beartown hockey, how that creates just tension between the towns, and then everything just culminates in just a release of the tension and the devastating impact that it has on these towns. It's surprisingly hard to summarize Us Against You as, you know, it's the middle book of the series, and so it follows these tensions rising. And it all feels kind of mundane if you're like, it's a hockey team, like what's the big deal? And I get it. What makes this book and this whole series so special is just the incredible character work that Backman does. You know, you could just have a few pages, just a few moments with a couple of characters, and you feel like you know them, you've known them their whole lives, and you just feel this deep, deep affinity for them. There are relationships, there are romantic relationships, friendship relationships, the loss of these relationships, the loss of loved ones, the loss of dreams and futures, and just teenagers being teenagers and acting impulsively. It is all just kind of small scale drama that feels so big. Anyway, I feel like I'm rambling about this book. I can't really have coherent thoughts about it because I did finish the final book in the series that I'll talk about in a few minutes. But I will say that when I finished this book, I finished it while taking my dog for a walk through my neighborhood, and I was crying uncontrollably. I cried throughout it, but man, this book, it messed me up. And, you know, I thought that this book messed me up bad, had nothing on the final book of the Bear Town series, let me tell you. From there, the next book that I read in February was ReDawn by Brandon Sanderson and Janci Patterson, which is another novella in the Skyward series. So ReDawn follows Alanique, who is our little gal over here. In the second Skyward book, Alanique in her spaceship crash lands on the planet of Detritus, where our cast of characters and our main character Spencer live. And so she's introduced in the second book, but she kind of goes away for the rest of that story. And so ReDawn and the other novellas focus on what Alanique was up to while Spencer was elsewhere. ReDawn is an action-packed novella. Like, it is just near constant spaceship fighting, dogfights, going to planets, figuring things out. Like, it is constant action. This one felt like it was too much. Like, there was just so much going on the whole time. So in the audiobook format, the rapid teleportation, if you will, of them from like here to here to here to here to here, like, it was so much to keep track of who was where and what. It was a lot to piece together. Also, I feel like this one so far has been the most YA feeling. So I don't have anything against YA, but sometimes just these teenagers, these little teeny boppers, I'm like, what are you doing? Like, they're just so kind of cringe. So some of the YA-ness especially was kind of cringe for me because, you know, Alanique is an alien. She doesn't know human culture, and it's all from her perspective of her trying to figure out how to be diplomatic around the humans and figuring out human culture and being like, oh, humans don't like to talk about their mate pairs. And she, like, it just kind of, like, is so naive, it's cringe, you know what I mean? And I get it's like it's lighthearted and it's silly and it's goofy, which is very Brandon Sanderson in this era, but it didn't I was so uncomfortable. I was like, oh gosh. So overall, I would say that ReDawn, I liked Sunreach way more. I loved FM way more than I really loved this story from. I think it was a lot of the perspective of Alanique figuring out human culture. I digress. I would give it another solid 3 stars. Like, it feels very necessary if you want to read the Skyward series. You gotta read it, but just be prepared for some, like, classic YA cringy moments that make you be like, oh girl, what? Okay, and then the next book that I finished, I rounded out the Bear Town experience, and I finished The Winners by Fredrick Backman. Needless to say, I can just sum it all up in, I have never cried this hard. I think that maybe I'm just like in my, I'm in my emotional era. This book got me in my feels even more. I was listening to the audiobook and I don't know if I've ever had like tears in my eyes reach max capacity and like without blinking just like fall. It was full on sobbing tears at the end. And I also cried within like the first 10% of this book, so if you are looking for something really cathartic, to just like get the tears going. Beartown. The Winners takes place 2 years after the end of Us Against You. So the characters have had time to, transition to newer things that were set up in the second book. So some characters have left Beartown, some characters have left positions in hockey that they had been in. There are new characters coming in. There's a whole new family that is introduced, but at the beginning, we come back to Beartown and there is a natural disaster that has to bring the town together. And someone dies, and the people who had left Beartown come back. And this book follows everyone back together, figuring out the future of Beartown hockey, figuring out the future of head hockey. And now that, one of the ice rinks was destroyed, both of the hockey teams have to play together. And so they're like in this confined space where tensions are so high, grief is high, and it's just like, it's just ready to blow. This series talks about so much. It talks about, having autonomy over your own body, of whether you're an athlete and everyone's talking about how you're treating your body and they treating you as an object for their entertainment, and how women and girls experience that in their day-to-day teenager girl lives of feeling like a commodity. Again, the character work is just so solid that even for the characters who aren't morally great, who have deep problems, you feel for them. Like there's a new character who's introduced in this, even though he is very morally gray, I guess. You understand him. Like, you understand his trauma, you understand what led him to be where he is, you understand his very twisted, demented logic and what got him to where he is. And it's like that for every single character. You understand their highs, you understand their lows, you understand their friendship dynamics. You can, like, predict how they're going to respond to scenarios before they even hit because we know them so well. I have heard some criticisms, and I get these criticisms of especially Us Against You, or no, of The Winners, because The Winners it's very, very long. The audiobook was 21 hours, and it does repeat some beats again and again, and like there are some things that happen that weren't super necessary to happen that did just beef up that page count. And I understand that not everyone loves that, but there was something about this series where that didn't bother me. I just wanted to spend as much time as possible in this world with these characters, experiencing things with them. So I know that there are criticisms and these books aren't perfect, but to me, if a book just hits me on a deep emotional level, it's a 5-star book. Like, I'm going to be thinking about this series for years and years and years. So that alone makes it a 5-star. Series overall for me, these final 2 were absolutely 5-star reads. And last up for me for my final book that I read in February was Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb, which this was my most anticipated new series to start, because when I finished the Magician's trilogy, I was like, you know what? I'm going to start the Farseer trilogy. And I am so sorry for what I'm about to say. I liked it. I did not love it, and I feel like since reading it, more of you are now telling me after I've read it that things start to kind of pick up and like get better in the upcoming books. So like in book 2 and 3, things really pick up, but boy, this book was hard to read. It took me nearly a full month to read this book. And I think that largely what took so long to read it was the style of the writing. So this book is told from the perspective of Fitz, as he is presumptively much older, reflecting on his life and how he became an assassin. So it is told past tense, first person, in this retrospective viewpoint, which I think could be engaging, but what that does is there is not a lot of dialogue, because like you wouldn't expect someone, I don't know how many years later, many years later, to remember the exact details of conversations. So the dialogue is few and far between, so you kind of have a lot of Fitz saying, and this was what then happened, and this then happened next, and this is what was said by these people in this way. That whole style lended itself to kind of a passively told story to me that did not feel that engaging. It didn't feel that fast-paced. Sure, the stakes were high. There were moments that I loved of like Fitz figuring out how to navigate the court and the drama and the politicking, and that was super engaging. That was really fun. Him and his relationships with his friends as they evolved as he grows up were good. But at the end of the day, this book was a lot to read. Also, a lot of this book is just Fitz is just beaten down by life, basically. It was so sad, and Fitz feels his emotions very, very, very deeply, and he can't catch a break, and he is just absolutely bogged down by life and by grief and by sadness. And I mean, I felt it. I felt Fitz's deep, deep despair, and it kind of bummed me out a lot. I think that was also really hard to read. It was kind of hard to want to pick up because I knew that if I was going to be picking it up, I was going to be sad. And when I read, I want to read to like escape and like laugh, or at least be like entertained and gasp and like, oh, things are happening. And that didn't really hit for this book. There's something that like when it's a retrospective story, it kind of spoils the plot because I'm like, well, he's gonna live. He's gonna make it past this. Like, I don't know. So overall, I would give this book, again, another 3 stars. That might change in the future. I will keep reading the series. I'm going to probably take a little break from this series and come back to it when the sun is out a little bit longer in the day. I am excited for books 2 and 3 because the ending, the final like 100-ish pages of this, where like the political conspiracies are being revealed, I live for that. I live for political drama in fantasy books, and I think there's going to be a lot more of that in the rest of the series, so I'm very excited for it. I will be coming back to it, but I just kind of need to like take a deep breath before I dive back into it. Okay guys, there you have it. Those are the 5 books that I read in the month of February. Again, not my best reading month, but I did read, you know, I read 2 books that are like 2 of my now all-time favorites. So, you know, we'll catch the wins where they are. If I had to choose a favorite of the month, needless to say, it's The Winners by Fredrick Backman. So thank you so much for tuning into this video, and I will see you back here for another video soon. Bye!